Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out early on a Friday. Today is the Friday, November 21st meeting of the Planning Board and also of the Housing Commission. Appreciate everybody coming. Like I said, just a reminder, we're being recorded. We're going to jump in, Adam, and I have chatted a little bit along with Peter about sort of the order of things here, just to kind of hopefully get us through as much as we can. So we'll just dive right in.
And Steve, I think there's a packet on the end for if you want to take those. They're probably extras, or maybe Vicky already gave you. Okay, you're all set. All right, so I think it makes the most sense. Planning board members worked on the two pieces that we have to amend to come in compliance with state law, and we had a couple of things that we were adding in. So if we could just go over those really quickly, if Housing Commission members will just bear with us for a moment, then I think we can get through that quickly and dedicate most of the time to our cottage court discussion. So is everybody good with that? Okay. All right, so the definition of family that we had discussed that no longer can include anything to do with an actual familial relationship is basically shortened down to be one or more adult persons occupying a single dwelling unit. I took time to look at what a few other towns are doing. Obviously, everyone's definitions are in peril as far as defining a family without using family. And so by adding adult, it sort of gets past the part where we had the under the age of 18. The question becomes, do you then still want to put a cap on just the adults in the house? That being said, that cap will exist whether they are their college-age kids that are living there or, multi-generational. So I think that's the last thing that we just need to sort of put to bed is whether you want to have any cap on that or not.
I have a question, just having done state law. Is adult defined somewhere?
It is.
And how do we define it?
It's not us, it's in... It's,
RSA?
Right, because it's in the voter registration, I believe.
Is it over 21?
Over 18.
Over 18. Okay.
I've got a comment. If I were reading this sort of, as the village idiot, which some of us are anyway, it says one or more adult persons occupying a single dwelling unit. It doesn't mention children at all. So it sounds like it is exclusively adults. Is that the case? Is that what we want to communicate?
Well, I would say it's in there if we want to put a cap on the numbers. If we don't want a cap, I would recommend we take out the adult and it's just simply one or more persons.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to say one or more persons because otherwise it seems exclusive to adults.
What other folks think?
Okay. And I think removing the cap, at least for now, seeing if it creates any problems without is probably the way to go. Now that we can't work within parameters to define it, it's too risky to end up having a family, an actual family that isn't a defined family. Okay, great.
What's the relevance of the definition?
Of ours?
No, this.
Oh, it's used in one family dwelling unit, two family dwelling unit.
I would
formerly-
be fine with 5 adults. I mean, it seems there should be some.
Well, I will admit I know of at least one family that is multi-generational that has 6 adult family members. And they were before both the zoning board and the planning board within the last 18 months, if you can all remember which family that was. But so I think 5 might be low if we're looking at, if we now have to by state law include actual related individuals, that may be too low a cap.
I thought we couldn't put a cap on it.
We can put a cap, it's just that our definition formerly allowed us to exclude people who were actually related. And now, state law, you can't have your family definition have any bearing on actual relations. So by putting a cap, you're bringing all the people that just happen to have 4 kids and they're all college age, and so now there's a family of 6 that's their dwelling, or a multi-generational situation.
Adam, I'm going to interject something. The one that was before the ZBA has people living there that are caregivers also, that are not related. I mean, it just, and the family needs them.
I don't believe that's the case. I think they have outside help that's caregiving that comes in, but it's grandparents, the parents that own the house, 2 adult children that are out of college, an adult son who he and his wife are the caregivers in the evenings, and then their baby. And so it's a pretty, plus the child with the actual disability that needs to be cared for.
What if we said limit it to 5 or less unrelated adults?
We can't. That's what the state law change is saying, because that's what
Okay, I don't know how, think of a single-family home. What does that look like? How many driveways, how many entrances? I mean, why isn't it not an apartment building? How do we define single-family home as what we think of as a single-family home? Or don't we anymore?
You know, I think it is sort of a watering down, Paul, but unfortunately we can't, there's not a whole lot we can do as far as defining the occupants.
So it sounds like we're trying to prevent something. What is it that we're trying to prevent?
Yeah.
Can we define that
So-
or identify that?
Historically, this was very popular in college towns because they were trying to prevent, you know, the animal house situation, right? And so it has not been as much of an issue in New London since Colby Sawyer has required everyone to live on campus. We just don't have the same level of, you know, roommate apartment rental situations. I'll be honest, in 7 years, I can't remember a time where we have enforced it. It's virtually impossible to tell from an outsider's perspective who's actually related. And so we haven't had a lot of interaction with this particular definition in recent years. I think there was a time when Colby Sawyer was full and it was. Mm-hmm.
So to be clear, you're proposing we get rid of the adult part, right?
I think if you're not going to have a cap, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Are folks good with that? Paul?
I just would like to look at the definition of single-family home and see if we've now inadvertently created an apartment house.
Well, you haven't because they don't have independent housekeeping establishments. So let me just get to. So a single-family dwelling is a detached residential dwelling unit designed for and occupied by one family only.
But a family is an unlimited number of unrelated people.
Unlimited number of people. We can't say whether there's relation or not.
A family doesn't do any work in terms of the definition anymore.
I think what we're struggling with is the use of the word family, which is not generally how we understand family, but when it's in context of single family, multifamily, it means something different. That's what I'm getting my head around.
I agree.
Adam? Could we use the term group?
I wouldn't recommend it because that would be a single group dwelling or a multi-group dwelling because you end up, because family is what is pulled into all of those other phrases, you would have to amend all those other
Oh, yeah,
phrases.
okay, all right.
So Adam, you said before you recommend us just trying this for now and seeing, as you said, it hasn't been an issue, but
I think so. Obviously, we could put in a cap that there's no more than 2 people per bedroom. The law allows for that. I think that's even more challenging to enforce. And it's no more than 2 adults per bedroom. And I think that's challenging, but you could.
This happens so infrequently that it comes up really in an issue of enforcement when a neighbor calls and said, hey, I've kind of had it, this is been going on too long, you need to do something about it. So it's not as if we have to know as a town every occupant of a building that's residential, single family, so to speak. So I think within some reasonable amount we can put some limitations if we want to.
I'm wondering, on what basis would the neighbors be complaining? Would it be a noise issue? Would it be too many cars in the driveway issue? Really, on what basis would they complain? What basis would we be concerned about?
Well, everybody's trigger is a little different, but it could be any one of those or it could be all of those.
I think it oftentimes is the cars in the driveway. I get calls that, why can't you force people to park in their garage? Why are they leaving their cars in the driveway? They bought more cars than they have drivers. Those sorts of calls are what we.
Yeah, but is there any statute or ordinance or whatever that they're violating if they've got too many cars in the driveway? So I agree with you, it's an enforcement issue, and there really is no basis for anybody to complain about this stuff except their peak about it. And so for us to try and regulate that when there is no basic enforceable statute or ordinance, I think we're inviting trouble.
so it sounds like we have the 2 options of leaving it, as you would suggest for now, right, Adam, no cap at all, or as Peter, I think, hinted at, but don't let me put words in your mouth, like a large cap, like some outsized number that wouldn't run afoul of caregivers and adult kids coming home from college and all that. So like 10, or I don't know what the number would be, but like I'm just saying, like, but other than that, I mean, are those the 2 kind of main options we see?
Yeah, I mean, it could potentially in the definition of bedroom, I think, which I don't know, it's really hard to see, but
Closet, right?
right, it has to have 1 or more windows, a closet, a door. You can't walk through other bedrooms, all of that. But
Could it be based on how many bedrooms there are? Not saying per
Well,
bedroom, but
and it's
Well,
where
we're
I
limited
think,
to 2.
right, I think in the bedroom definition we could say not occupiable by more than 2 adults.
That brings up the enforcement issue, though, as you said. I guess I just wonder, I want us to be able to not spend too much time on this, but like, what do we think? Do we just, is your gut still, Adam, that we would not cap it and deal with it, or would you want to put some, again, large enough cap that it would sort of encompass any potential scenario that we can envision as we talk about different things here?
Right, I mean, if somebody starts running a boarding house, that is a different, that's a separate use. And so I think there's other ways, other avenues to deal with that sort of thing. I think when you start getting into splitting hairs over what is a family, whether that is just people occupying space together, or it gets very tricky very quickly.
So I think, like Nancy brought the idea, like, what are we trying to prevent? And you said essentially this was always, as we've talked about before, the animal house idea, right? So that's what everyone I think is broadly not in favor of, but although it doesn't seem like it's been much of a problem. So would you say we should just?
I think simple is probably best for at least the immediate future, and then we could adjust as state law either changes or as issues arise.
How do folks feel about that?
I really can't see any other option because we have no enforceable means to regulate that. I mean, other than to say we can't have more than 27 people in the thing, And the number really is quite arbitrary.
Right. And so our use, and I said rooming house, but we technically call it a lodging house and then use rooming house in the definition. But so we have lodging house specifically allowed in commercial, and it's a building in which the rooms are rented with or without meals to 3 or more, but not exceeding 16 persons. A boarding house or a rooming house or a furnished room shall be deemed a lodging house. So I think that provides a little bit of protection if you are renting out, you know, rooms as the example you gave, Paul. That's only allowed in the commercial zones as an explicit use, and that's just 3 or more people. So I think that even gets a little, obviously that's, if someone in the residential zone is renting a 5-bedroom house and they have 4 kids and 2 parents, we're not going to win that in court if we try to call them a lodging house, right? I mean, I think there's a standard that's reasonable and not, so. But it does provide us a little bit of protection if somebody is really running a boarding house, more or less.
Yeah, I just looked up the RSA definition, and it's similar to ours of single-family home, 1 or more families. I think this is not our problem. This is a bigger problem.
If we used the word household instead of family, because they are synonymous and interchangeable. I mean, when I think about it as a single family, single household, or multi-household, then it makes sense to me. But those 2 words being interchangeable doesn't make any sense at all to use household instead of family.
There is in the RSA, which is single-family home, not what we're looking at here. It says unit is a unit to be occupied by 1 or more families and is separate from other units. So if somebody was taking a house and trying to make it into an apartment house, I think we could fall back on that if that's in our definition. I don't have it in front of me.
Apartment house is sort of a separate thing because they have independent kitchens.
No, single-family home.
Single-family home is in the definition, a detached residential unit designed for and occupied by 1 family only.
Okay, well, the state says, adds, and is separate from other units.
And that's where this says a detached. So I think it's saying it in a different way, but the same principle. As far as changing the actual word, I think we do want to stick to single-family dwelling, multifamily, just because that's a commonly accepted identity.
Yeah, I see your point though, Charlene, I get that, but it makes sense. So it sounds like, I'd like us to be able to move on because we have a lot to do. So it sounds like for now, we're going to say no cap. I'm looking around, wave your arms if you object strenuously, otherwise we'll try to go with that. Does that work for you, Adam?
Yep. I don't know if we're in work sessions if we're doing public comment or not, but I
Oh,
think
yeah, I
it
didn't
does
think about
have
that.
something
Sorry,
to it.
Steve. I didn't mean to ignore you. Yeah, do you want to just grab
Can you
a
just
mic
grab
from
Nancy's
somebody?
mic real quick? Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve Root, resident of New London. I know many of you here. This will be voted on separately by the voters. I think that you got to think about how it plays because the animal house image could be an objection, and so you'll need a good explanation. I think that there are other controls because on paper it looks like you're throwing open the gates.
Yep, and certainly the ballot question will explain that this is to meet the changed state law last year that no longer allows us to define by relation.
Yeah, but my point is you're taking out the 5, and you could put in a 7 or a 10. They might not look good either, but you're doing more than just, you're responding to state law, but you're also making a choice to have no cap on the number of people, and as I say, I don't think that's going to look great to the voters.
May I address that point? Steve, how is it that you would enforce it?
And I think,
I'm
Mary
asking
Ann,
you
it's-
directly, pardon me?
But I think just in the interest of time, I think Steve's point's well taken, that it's going to be part of the public outreach and the education of voters ahead of time and with what they're seeing on the ballot. And I don't think he's disagreeing that it's a funny spot to be in now, but making sure people understand the discussion that we've had that has brought us to that conclusion, more or less.
As far as enforcement, I don't have any ideas other than currently you have a cap on 5 unrelated people, so you have the same enforcement problem now. I think the answer would be we're not making it any worse with a cap.
I think what you're saying is be sure to take steps that people understand the rationale and really the definition surrounding this. But if we leave it this way, there really is, it begs the question of a cap and how to enforce it.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but right now we have a cap, so we have an enforcement issue, the same issue. I'm sort of agreeing with Paul that by eliminating the cap and eliminating even the word adult, which would go with the cap, that you're making a choice between something, and if you're doing it because you don't think the current provision's enforceable, that's fine, but I say I don't think it's going to play well with the Animal House image.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So moving on now to the required changes to ADU. I think everyone is aware of us having to allow detached, no longer being allowed to go through a conditional use permit by right. So I won't start from scratch, but here in red is what we talked about adding at the last one, so that the definition now reads a residential living unit that is subordinate to a single-family dwelling and that provides independent living facilities for one or more persons, including provisions for sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation on the same parcel of land as the principal dwelling it accompanies. Good? Okay. And then there, the strike-throughs, nothing has changed there. That has to do with the administration of it that is now changing to simply a building permit like we've discussed in our previous meetings. Down here, you'll see the underlined red text that all applicable setbacks shall be met, and this is to clarify that that is for new construction and additions, as the state law requires us to allow the conversion of existing accessory structures that are non-compliant and legally non-conforming. And so in compliance with Article 20B is the legally non-conforming article of the zoning ordinance. So anything there? Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
Do we need to, are we referencing we're getting rid of the conditional use permit, so we don't even have to address it, because it's being struck?
Right, correct, yep, and the legislation that went through and passed specifically said you can no longer use a CUP. So we added in clarifying language that really is not, all of these things exist anyways, but just to sort of hit it home, that all applicable standards of the zoning ordinance, including overlay districts, like the shoreline overlay district, wetlands, streams, all of those, and town regulations, including but not limited to the septic health regulation, shall apply. All of that applies anyways, but we're putting it here in the last section there where we need to eliminate the design standards of the unit because we're not holding single families to those same design standards. And that is more or less everything. I know the question of one of the dwellings shall be the domicile of the property owner. There's, I think, been some discussion on how are they verifying that, how are they asserting that. I don't know if we want any discussion on that, or if we want to put something in.
Adam, can I just ask, when you get an application, are you going to check if the owner votes here?
No, because voting, you don't have to be a registered voter to be a resident. So we do typically,
It's domicile.
or you don't have to have your there's no law that you have to register to vote, right?
Right.
So that doesn't really indicate whether or not it's their domicile.
Unless they were registered to vote someplace else, it would.
Yeah, I don't know how we would, and maybe I should know this, but is there a national voter registry? Like, how would we know what town to look for somebody else?
You could ask them the question, that's all.
Right.
Or,
I mean,
or
when they sign the permit, they're signing that they understand and
that it's their domicile.
right. I mean, the building permit, which it would now be by, the property owner has to sign it that they have met all of the criteria. We could have, a sheet like you and I discussed at one point, an affidavit or something that lives outside of the zoning ordinance, and we can say, one of the dwellings shall be the domicile of the property as certified in writing by the owner, or we could have something like that here and then require them to provide that.
We could also ask if they file tax returns in New Hampshire.
I will say when we get to those questions, people get a little, yeah.
Adam, would a separate detached ADU have its own tax bill?
No.
No, okay.
No. And that's part of where it has to stay part of the main property. You can't have a condominium or anything.
I have another question, if it's okay. Shall not be considered an additional dwelling unit for the purposes of determining minimum lot size or density. So in other words, what that means is the parent lot, if you will, is what's considered for density and lot size. The fact that there's a detached ADU or some other ADU on it doesn't impinge on the parent lot.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Adam, I have one question, and this might have been previously addressed, but one of the concerns with the ADUs prior was that people would roll in mobile homes and stick them on their property. Does this piece where you say conform to the requirements of single-family dwelling circumvent that, or?
No, we actually can't. We can't limit whether or not they use a mobile home for an ADU. In state statute, there is the ability to limit whether or not townhouses and manufactured homes have accessory dwelling units, but not whether or not they can be an accessory dwelling unit. And so there was some confusion in that.
I'm a little confused about principal dwelling. I don't want to open up Pandora's box here, but principal dwelling. So let's just take in a scenario. Older couple, perhaps like me, spend enough time in New London, but they have a home in Florida, and they're gone for 4 months of the year. Would that be considered a principal dwelling then, because they're here more of the time than they are in Florida? I don't have a home in Florida. It's not my problem, but I want to make sure I understand what we're saying here.
And I'm sorry, Peter, can you just point me directly to it's in B?
It's in E2. It says principal dwelling, owner of the lot on which the principal dwelling is located.
And so that's in relation not to what the owner considers their principal dwelling, but the relationship of the primary unit versus the subordinate unit.
Okay.
So, and it comes out of the definition we use it too in the parcel of land. So a residential living unit that is subordinate to a single-family dwelling and that provides independent living facilities for one or more persons, including provisions for sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation, on the same parcel of land as the principal dwelling unit it accompanies.
Essentially, it's like the parent unit.
Okay, and you can switch that, right?
Yes.
So you can swap it, and that's part of the affidavit. Okay.
Well, the people can choose to live in the ADU or the principal dwelling, but the principal dwelling stays the principal dwelling because the intent is that the ADU is always the subordinate in design and function, whether or not they choose to occupy one or the other. It's less about the people and more about the physical structures.
Steve, you had a question? Can you just grab a mic? Sorry.
So 2 years ago, we were talking about detached ADUs, and I became concerned about the term conveyance. So just as a question, if we want detached ADUs or even attached ADUs to be attainable housing, then we're assuming somebody could rent it. Is that correct? So that's not a conveyance because conveyance isn't allowed. So someone could do a 99-year lease, which to me is a conveyance, but it also is in sheep's clothing, looks like a rental. I think in the statute, it says that you can specifically prohibit leases of the land on which a detached ADU. Again, focusing on getting this past the voters, I would make it as tight as you can and eliminate these ambiguities around conveyance. Saying it won't be a condominium is one thing, but I don't think that covers the waterfront. As long as I got the microphone, separate point.
Can we hit that
Go
one
ahead.
first
Okay,
before
go
we
ahead.
move on? Okay. So I guess the question becomes, and I'm looking at the municipal association guidance on that, and the municipality may prohibit accessory dwelling units associated with rented or leased land. Would the land actually be leased, or would the structure be leased?
But if we want to rent ADUs to affordable, in an affordable way, we got to allow rentals. So the structure has to be, something has to be rented, and it's got to be.
But I'm not sure that it's under the, so the question that they bring it up in is under the topic of the manufactured homes and the townhouses. And so my understanding in one of the webinars I had done previously after the law changed was that that provision was intended for manufactured home parks where you're actually renting your physical lot, not necessarily the single family home where if you're leasing even if it's a 99-year lease of the interior space to occupy, you're not necessarily renting the land.
Yeah, I understand. 2 points. One is put in the language from the RSA about not renting the land. That strengthens your case to the voters. Separately, to me, a 99-year lease is a conveyance, and so I think we ought to be able to say leases or rentals can't exceed 3 years, 5 years, or something. I'm trying to limit this to the intended goal of creating attainable housing. That's my point. And I haven't, I just woke up this morning and came. I haven't read the statute, but my general point would also be if there are restrictions in the statute that are reasonable and strengthen your case to the voters, put them in. So a separate point. In 2016, we were having discussions about detached ADUs. And others, including me, were particularly concerned that we have a lot of waterfront property, valuable, expensive property. Nobody's going to build attainable housing there. Maybe they'll build something for their caregiver, but the waterfront property. So now we have the legislature has told us we got to allow detached ADUs on every parcel. What happens if in the next session they come to their senses and say you can limit that in some places like within waterfront properties? We now will have a provision that is broader than state law requires. So I'm suggesting a snapback provision that would say that in some way, and I don't have language for you, but consider something that says that if the state doesn't require this as much. And it's tricky because you're going to leave the 1,000 square feet in, and that's in excess of what the state law requires. But something that would take this away from waterfront property if the legislature comes to its sense and says that doesn't have to be a requirement. So, and again, I'm here because we had battles in 2016. The voters slapped it down in 2022. I think you got to think about packaging this thing so that it serves its purpose for attainable housing and convenient caregiver housing, but is not throwing open the doors for development, particularly on waterfront lots. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Do you have an example, Steve, of, I've never seen that in a zoning ordinance as far as it's this unless the law changes, then it's this. Do you have an example that we could look at?
Speak into the mic, please.
Doesn't state law trump town ordinance?
It does, and so I think
Why
that,
do we need the language?
and I think that's what Steve is saying, is that there are a lot of bills this year to roll back some of the bills that were approved last year, and so I think that, right, and that's, I think, the point of, if you had something built in, you might provide a safeguard down the road. I'm just curious if there's an example that we could look at. Okay, I'm not, and I'd have to talk to town council to see if that's something we can even, have a voter confirm, not knowing what the facts of the law may be at that point. As far as the prohibition of ADUs on rented or leased land, is that something that people want to add in? What's your?
I have a legal question. In Massachusetts, I know that's where I had my arenas. A 99-year ground lease in a commercial project is considered a fee interest. And if it's recorded, it becomes as valid as a deed. Is that true in New Hampshire? So it would be considered a conveyance? Do you know? Okay. Well, I think.
I'm not sure.
I think if it's a concern of the voters and we're not worried about it that much, I think we should do that, because long-term ground lease goes beyond generations, and it's so easy to add it. Sure, if we need to. You gonna use his? Okay.
I'll share
Oh, yeah, they do have kind of a heavy corner of microphones, so we can distribute. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
Appreciate
give me 1 second to just write this out, and then I'll read it back to you guys. So adding an additional provision just after this one, and I'm sorry, I don't have the Word document on this, it's on the server, so I can't do it real time in front of you, but an ADU may not occupy rented or leased land. Leave it simple, clean, doesn't change anything, but to Steve's point, it clarifies for the general public. And, okay.
I'm fine with that.
Read that again, please.
Sure. An ADU may not occupy rented or leased land. So it's not saying the ADU can't be rented or leased, it's the land.
Folks good with that? I'm seeing heads. I think it makes sense to me. Thanks, Steve.
All right, everyone good with moving
Yep.
on from ADUs? All right. Okay. Now jumping into cottage court. Do you want to do institutional now instead? Sure.
Just try to do that.
Yep. And I think. I didn't open that. Bear with me 1 second. I didn't have that one open. So jumping into the institutional, which folks correct me if I am wrong, but my recollection is the only thing that we had sort of left requiring some discussion was the overall height requirement on institutional. And where we had left last was allowing for the institutional college to increase their buildings for residential purposes to 35 feet. I'm trying to find. Multifamily and single family and two family to 45 feet. And then the academic buildings or non-residential to 55, I believe, was in here. And that was in response to the fact that the buildings on the college property are already non-conforming. The zoning board had recently granted the variance for the nursing building to conform to the adjacent heights at 52.9 feet, I think it was, which was still shorter than the others. And then in the hospital, we had also limited the residential to 45. So I think the question became, did we want to include single family and multifamily still in that 45 single family and two family in that 45, or is it provided relief just for the multifamily? And were there any design requirements as far as roof gabling or illusion of a gabled roof even that we wanted to require with that allowance? I think those were the 2 points to discuss. I don't feel super strongly, I don't think, on any of these. I do think it makes some sense to a 45-foot tall single-family home is a little funny. I don't think anyone's actually going to propose that, but it may, looking at this, it may make sense to just separate out multifamily at a 45-foot, or to even just create another line that simply says, structures limited to 35 feet with the exception of multifamily 45 feet, or to just sort of divide it out. Yep. Okay.
What are the fire height restrictions?
We really don't have one anymore. I mean,
okay.
within these parameters, because our ladder goes to 70 feet, and with the installation of sprinklers now, it's not quite as as urgent. The state law did roll back what the threshold is for requiring sprinklers in multifamily. So now that's only 5 units or more. So you could have a 4-unit multifamily that went to 45 feet that's not sprinkled. However, the ladder truck goes to 70 feet, the current ladder truck, and I can't imagine that any future ladder truck would go less than that.
Can you, I know we talked about this, but now I couldn't find my note. The hospital at one point, there was plans to have some sort of housing, and you talked about the height at that point, anyway, of what the design was. And I would have said that was shorter than 45. Like, I know 45 made sense here because that kind of matches the buildings that are already here. But at the hospital, that's a whole new thing. And you can't really compare it to the height of the hospital because that's just a completely different beast. But what, do you know offhand what the height of the buildings they were proposing were?
hold on
Yeah,
just a
yeah,
second.
sorry.
It's, I just want to, and I'm not crafting this to be, I'm just putting notes in. I'll do it after. So just bear with me 2 seconds. And so for the college, are we leaving the academic buildings at 55 feet? Okay. Non. And I'm sorry, Aaron, your question was as far as continuums, height requirements on their development, was that
Yeah, I feel like we talked about at one point, like you had a number of what they had previously proposed for near the hospital.
Yeah, I can't tell you the exact number on all faces, but the 35-foot provision stood that exists in town, but that lot is sloping, so there was the south side of the building exceeded 35 feet minimally because the north side of the building was enough under that the average at grade around the building was less than 35. So while there was one face that was over, the other was under enough that it averaged out to 35, which is what the ordinance requires everywhere in town right now.
And I'm just not sure what people in general, what the feeling was of that space. And once again, like this is not like here where we're trying to match the aesthetics and we kind of know what the buildings are going to look like. It's a currently wooded area potentially that they would develop. So what was the feeling from the public on that space and having potentially 45-foot tall buildings? Like, have you gotten any feedback from that?
When that building came through, I don't think we ever, I mean, planning board members who sat through those hearings might remember differently, but I don't think we had any pushback on the aesthetics or the size of the building.
And
I
those
think
were 2 stories, I assume?
I was 3. Yeah.
3,
Yep.
okay.
I think the pushback on that development, which there really wasn't much at all anyways, but more centered around the traffic and the intersection congestion and pedestrian connectivity.
I mean, we talked about the scale of the main building itself, and that became, the massing of the building kind of was the discussion more than the height per se, but because the height was lower, to your point, like what would be acceptable at the college would not be acceptable at the hospital, I think from a height, and we've said that even in recent weeks. I think that's why we went this 2-tiered, pun intended, like 2-tiered setup, I think, so. But does that answer your question? That in and of itself wasn't necessarily a thing so much as like the building was big. And so what they could do architecturally, they came back to sort of make it seem more segmented or make it seem a little bit more palatable. So it didn't look like we parked a hangar down there, you know?
Okay, yeah, that does answer. I'm just trying to picture, once again, like it's a different, very different feel.
But I think broadly, I think that this group, if I'm not saying it wrong, I think we all thought that there should be two different levels, one for the college and one for the hospital. So yeah.
And Aaron, this is bringing up the conversation that we also had left hanging that I sort of overlooked, was the concept of a wider buffer for the expanded portion. Sorry, and just to give you an idea of where, I know we did this before, but let's. So that red line, and I know it's hard to see, sorry, that is about 100 feet in. So the tree line is a little over 50 feet. We could say something like buffer or setback of X from adjacent residential zones so that they don't have it from their lot lines with themselves, or these 2 lots are commercial and the hospital also owns this commercial lot, so that there's sort of a hierarchy of the buffer, as it would be kind of silly to require an additional buffer from their own lot line.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that before, but that makes,
We didn't.
that's
no.
smart. I mean, that, I think gets at what we were saying, is like, we want to have a buffer where we think it would impinge on neighbors, whereas we don't want to impinge on what the hospital would want to do for land A it already owns or for other commercial structures, because that's kind of, that gets self-defeating.
I think we just want to be specific that it's for structures, given that this house, the county road frontage is very narrow for that lot anyways, so we just want to make sure that, they can have an access road, they could have, pedestrian amenities, those sorts of things in that area. So we'd just say, all structures must be, I don't know what people are feeling, if it's 50, 75, 100. I
You
think-
said the tree line now is about 50, and then 100 was obviously double past that, so.
Yeah, 100 is generous, I would say. I think 50 may seem light to folks, that 75 may be the
Sweet spot.
balance.
Adam, does this include Lionsbrook?
Yes, that would be a residential use.
Okay, because, all right.
I mean, and do you want to weigh in on this at all, Lori? Like, this would seem to not, my take on it is that it would not seem to limit the hospital in ways that seem unfair to the hospital, but then still protect the neighbors.
Correct, and we certainly, whatever we do, we need to live there with the neighbors for a long time. And so I think 75 seems reasonable to me, because if you look at that lot, if you get 75 feet from Lion Brook, that's kind of the area where the uplands, because there's so much wetlands in there. On the, I don't know whether it's the east side or toward the Home and Lane side, that's not really an issue because it's so densely wooded. There's wetlands there, and there's also that easement, the electrical and sewer easement, that kind of protect that neighborhood. On the other side there. So, for that against the Lion Brook and along Parkside, I think that makes sense as well, so that there's some buffer to, being able to create a more it's in a residential area, to create that as maybe more residentially oriented in the future. So I think that's fine. 100 may be a little far. 75 seems reasonable to me.
I'm hearing murmurs and seeing nods that people are happy with 75.
And then if I remember the continuum site plan well enough, the slopes, once they got closer to the trees, are more difficult to put structures in anyways. There was a pretty decent sloping from the loop road.
Correct.
So it's probably something that doesn't really constrain the hospital,
No.
but provides a lot of security for folks who are voting on it.
Correct. But I do agree with you, Adam, against up at the county road level there, because if we remember, that was the access road to get, and it actually ultimately may make sense for the hospital to move that road down, because it has way better sight lines along County Road there, and at one time, close to 20 years ago, the police chief really wanted it to be further south, but we couldn't. And so it ended up to be a one-way egress at that point in time, versus having anyone be able to come into that. So it just leaves some flexibility there.
And certainly if you were able to utilize a shared driveway, it would buy you a little bit of expansion room at
Correct.
the hospital
Correct.
too.
Well, and it controls the traffic a little bit more there.
So, all right, I'm hearing that Peter, were you going to say something?
Yeah, just for the record, I'm recusing myself because of my relationship with the hospital. So I know it's not a vote, but I'm recusing myself. Thank you.
Appreciate that. It seems like 75 works for folks, and I think that is a smart distinction, Adam, to posit the residential aspect of that. So that's smart.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll wordsmith this a bit, but buffer of no structures within 75 feet of residentially zoned property lines and Parkside Road.
Quick question on structures. Any reason that they would have any small thing that would need to be closer for any, I don't know.
Like a gatehouse or something?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's any, we're not creating a problem that we don't intend to there, are we?
Yeah, I think if that were the case, that may be the spot where the zoning board's relief
Come in, yeah,
needs to
okay,
come into
perfect.
play.
That's good for me, thanks.
And I think just to give people some context, if it were a gatehouse or something where there was a security component to it, that is a unique use of that land that I think, looking at my my one zoning board member in the room that seems to me like something that would have a decent chance of getting a variance of controlling. Okay. Yep. Okay, so anything else on institutional, or move that forward to our next planning board meeting when we actually make
Adam,
the...
we had spoken, I just asked the question on the side, I think the last meeting, whether the hospital felt that including a workforce housing bonus would help to attract developers. My feeling is if you don't have it, you won't have any workforce housing, but that...
I don't know. My answer then and today is I don't know. I don't know whether that, and I don't know how you structure that in the regs to do that.
So, Paul, they're within the workforce housing overlay as it is. So any residential application that they're choosing to go through on this property, for the workforce housing portion, if it were, by statute, workforce housing, could utilize the bonuses that we already have baked into the workforce housing overlay. So if you want additional density bonus over and above that, then we could have something special in here for a density bonus. But if they were to bring a development, they could say, I don't even remember what we said for the 6 units per acre shall be allowed in here. I mean, this is a 40, do you remember, Lori, off the top of your head? 41, 42. So that's about the size of the actually, that's how the whole conversation went. Was
Not all of it is buildable either, so that wouldn't, because you have so much wetlands and steep slopes in there that's not buildable, so it's substantially less than that.
And so that really probably is the maximum build out, workforce housing or otherwise, because we worked back from the continuum proposal of units to get to that 6 units per acre, I believe, because they had about 150-ish units at various times. It fluctuated, but
I think if it qualifies for whatever the potential is under the overlay, then that's probably adequate. You can bring that to the attention and just ask the developers if that's attractive.
And frankly, I think that 6 units per acre on a lot this size actually would result in more than the density bonus of the workforce housing overlay.
The other thing that we had talked about was it last week? I don't remember when it was. Is that, there's an element of this where we already own this land. We're not, there wouldn't be a purchase of new land to be able to do this. So the cost of being able to develop something may be a little less.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Everybody comfortable with?
Paul, you okay with that?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lori.
So let's go on to the cottage court. Okay, and so some of the yellow parts in the cottage court are things that the consultants had highlighted in previous drafts, but things that we had discussions on. And some of them are things that I changed following our discussion last week when we passed things off from the consultants. So I think it probably makes sense to just run through and hit each one of them. I know Peter has a list of things that he would like to touch on too, but do you think it makes most sense, Peter, to just hit the highlighted ones first and then? Okay. Okay. So that first one, we had eliminated the potential for the cottage cluster in ARR and excluding them from the shoreland overlay district. So both of those things are reflected there. Everyone good on that? No discussion? Okay. This next one, we walked back the units per acre in the R2 area. And so properties with access to public water and sewer in the commercial and urban residential zones may be permitted at a maximum of 10 units per acre of net developable area. So as you'll remember, that's excluding wetlands, steep slopes, that stuff comes out of that calculation. And properties with sorry, that should be without access. That actually really should not. Property. So we're trying to get to properties in the R2 would be permitted at a maximum unit or maximum density of 6 units per acre. So it really does not have to do with whether or not they have water and sewer. So.
Yeah, good point. I read that as without.
Adam, you know, I worked through this, and I think you end up saying that, but the definition of net developable area seems to be net of non-developable land, and therefore reduces the acres.
Say that again, Paul.
I had real trouble. I spent some time on this, and I still. We have this. Instead of acres, we have net developable area.
10 units per acre of net developable area. And so if you have a 10-acre parcel, and after you do your site review and you have 2 acres of wetland and steep slopes, then you have 8 units or 8 acres of net developable area. So then it's 10 units per acre of the 8 acres.
So that implies you could have 6 to 8 cottage developments on that site.
Well, it's almost irrelevant in an example like that because we've capped the maximum size of the development at 12 units anyways.
Well, that's my problem is when you've got larger tracts, how does the definition work? Can you have...
The tracts would have had to have been subdivided in order to reach a larger than 12 unit development potential.
Okay.
So, and I just want to, I think what we really want to say there is that properties in R1 without water and sewer and R2 are limited to the 6 units per acre. And that portion of R1 that does not have water and sewer is the very small area of R1 in Elkins, which the lots are tiny. So there's probably not going to be any clustering of any kind down there anyways, but I think that's what we were really getting at.
I agree. Folks okay with that? Yep. Okay. Steve, do you want to?
Just one question. Adam, to clarify, we talked at the last meeting about a cap on the number of cottage clusters per property. So is the way this worded saying you can only have 1 cluster per property? Or if you had a property of 10 acres, could you have 5 clusters theoretically?
No, because we've limited the development to...
Where does it say that? That's what I'm missing here.
It's maximum, where is it?
Because I thought we had discussed a cap of like 2 clusters per parcel, property,
So
lot. I don't know what word you all use, but
So if you turn to page 5, and maybe there's clarifying language that needs to go in here, but this is where it limits the cluster to no more than 12 cottages. Additional clusters may be permitted as part of the site development plan.
Yeah,
So
but
I
there's
guess
nothing that says you couldn't have, and I think that's going to be the biggest fear from the public is, could you put 20 clusters on there and have 200 and something houses, right?
Yeah, I had the same point on my list we'll get to. And also having developed subsidized housing in rural Pennsylvania, the magic sweet spot for residential rural projects, these are townhomes, but they were subsidized rentals, was 24 units per project. That was our sweet spot. So I was thinking, and my point was, I would no more than a total of 24. So you could do 2 clusters. My suggestion, anyway.
And I think for voters, that will be an important thing to add there. I do question the practical approach to it. So if you have a lot large enough and that really gets you to 5 clusters, you could just subdivide it into multiple lots and get your 2 clusters on 2 lots and 1 cluster on the last one. So are we essentially drafting a provision that provides a false sense of security? And if so, how do we make that a more real sense of security, I guess?
Why wouldn't we just go back to what I thought you said the first time, and that is if they can subdivide and have separate lots, then they can deal with that. I think this multiple clusters thing is where do you place them? It becomes, it's pretty free-ranging. If you conceive of a parcel, probably practically it's not, but if they need to subdivide.
So how about instead of saying additional clusters may be permitted as part of the development, 2 clusters may be permitted as a development, or? Because additional makes you think that you could have
Right.
as many as your lot supports.
As far as selling it, I think we're all in agreement. Nobody wants to see a cluster after cluster after cluster. Aaron brought up that point before, and others have said that as well, and I think we're all in agreement there. We want to see this, but in moderation. We don't want it to have it become a thing.
Adam, it seems to me that the subdivision regs, as an overlay to this question, have a lot to do with spacing and, you can't subdivide just any old piece of land, so.
You can't, but if someone has a large tract of land and the economic incentive to put in a road built to public road standard, you very quickly can get the frontage you need and the acreage you need if you had a really large lot. Now, we don't have that many really large lots in the R2 anyways. But
Adam, all I'm saying is, why not require subdivision and deal with it when you get to it? If you're gonna allow multiple clusters, the requirement of subdivision allows you to at least look at placement.
I guess I'm not seeing what you're saying about the requirement of subdivision. Subdividing the individual lots of or one cluster on each
Cluster
lot.
would have to be on a separate lot.
I do think from a developer's standpoint, that does raise the potential cost of things.
But you're saying beyond 2, right? If we said we were going to cap it at 2 clusters, if we thought.
If you want to have 2, that's fine. We have nothing in here about citing them. Other than, I guess this is all a board review anyway. But if you want to go to 2, but I think if you conceive of more than 2, people might not understand how that's going to work.
I think a clean way of doing this might just be no more than 2 clusters per development. And then if they have enough land that they want to subdivide and create other lots and apply as multiple developments, they could do that.
I don't quite understand why you would do that. What if somebody doesn't have, I mean, maybe someone has a parcel that would support 3. Why, again, if we're trying to make it easy for people, if you've got the parameters about what you need to support 3 clusters, then why would you limit it to 2? If the property, I mean, I don't even, does that make any sense?
I think the reason that you limited it is to get this passed. I think we have to start with what might be palatable to the voters. And if you cap it at 2, that's 24 potentially. I think people can wrap their brains around that. I think when you start making it bigger and bigger, you're going to get greater and greater resistance, and it's going to fail.
I'm not sure I agree with that. Think about Hilltop and the number of acres that are there and the number of units that are there. That particular area could have been structured as clusters. And I don't think it would have been overwhelming to people to have that kind of development.
But that's cluster, not cottage, and we're talking about a high density per
Same sort
acre.
of thing, though. You can have polka dots of cottages in the space that I don't think would be okay.
I
Clearly
disagree.
in the
I think-
minority.
I think-
No, and my reason for disagreeing is I think there's a big difference between, as a neighbor, and I am a neighbor of Hilltop, its backyard, and this is it's fundamentally different in that it's beautiful for the people who live there, but all of the preserved land is in the middle. And I know we have offsets, things like that, and actually I have a question later about that, but your parking's on the perimeter. You're just asking the neighbors to take on a lot of the things that we kind of deem ugly and they don't want to see, right? That's why you have this beautiful land in the middle, but you're just asking something different from the neighbors. And I think that's where I'm not sure, I agree. I don't know if we don't limit it, how it's going to be perceived until they see it and say, oh, that looks fine.
Right.
And that's fine. But I think we have to be careful from that standpoint. And I think that's because you have to have your parking in a different spot, your driveway's in a different spot.
Well, then, if I were a developer and I had the land, I would situate, and it supported 3 of these cottage court situations. I would put them in one section, and leave open the other space on the, say, the 3rd, and build it later.
I think that,
Well, I wouldn't subdivide.
Why the sub?
I wouldn't have to subdivide.
well, if we had a cap in 2, but,
If the cap is at 2 per parcel, yeah.
so I
You have
think,
to
I think,
subdivide, and that puts it through another process, which gives you the opportunity to, you.
Which begs the question of how do we, on cottage density 2, page 2, we're identifying this as, unless I'm really mistaken, we're saying 10 units per net developable, whatever that word is, area. We're not saying per acre. So,
I think that word is just missing, per acre of net developable area.
okay, well then, I changed my position.
so I think a lot of what I'm hearing is kind of and I hear your point, Marilyn, but I think the notion is we don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good, and if this is something new for voters and we're trying to make it palatable, to me, it seems like if we start with 2 and we see how it goes, and if we run into an issue, and that may require us revisiting this later. My sense is that if we do what Adam suggested and said, what was the wording exactly? You said 2 clusters may be permitted?
No more than 2 clusters per development.
Right, to me, that feels like, again, this feels like meeting voters maybe where they are in terms of, we know this is somewhat different for us, but this is not going to represent wholesale change.
I could drive a Mack truck through that. I think we need to say something about the total acreage, the density of the total acreage, not just the developmental area.
Well, you can't, all that's saying is if you take out steep slopes and wetlands and things like that. It's saying the same thing, I think.
Well, it's net developable acre, not area.
No, it's
Isn't it?
acre of net developable area.
Okay, then I think it needs to be in there.
Yep, in that one, and it is in the first one.
But you're saying, we could add that in just to underscore that point there if we wanted to,
Right.
right?
I mean,
Even though it wouldn't have,
a typo missing in the second use. If you look on the first page,
Okay.
10 units per acre of net developable area.
Okay, so we are limiting it in number 2 to acre of net developable area.
Correct. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think, would that help, Kathy? If we said net developable acre?
Well, or acre of net developable.
Or acre of net developable?
Yeah, yeah.
That would help.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to remind everyone, this is a phrase already used in the zoning ordinance that was introduced back at the workforce housing overlay rewrite. So it is hopefully going to become over time a more understood and
Peter, had a
utilized
question. Yeah,
phrase.
thank you.
2 things. One, just clarification. If there are no wetlands or steep slopes, then net developable area is the same as the acreage of the site.
Correct.
And there are sites that have that are particularly closer to the core of the town. I don't want to open up Pandora's box, but I was doing some math quickly. In the commercial zone, we allow a density of 1 unit per 5,000 square feet of land. And so that equates to 8+ units per acre, a little over 8 units per acre. And here we're saying it's 10 units per net developable area. So assuming we're dealing with something that doesn't have wetlands or steep slopes, we're increasing that density. I'm just thinking about how the public might view this. Should we use the same standard as what we have now in the commercial zone and just say we're applying it to a different type of housing? Or are we saying we want to allow that increase because the units are small and it's creating its own neighborhood? I just asked the question because I'm thinking about how the public would view this.
I mean, I think that if we don't also have the commercial zone seeing a little bit of a bump here, you may get pushback from the folks who live in the residential zones where this is a bump for them and saying, why would we not have the commercial sort of feeling that bump as well? I think the lots in the commercial zone on the whole are smaller in general, so that's going to be a constraint. There's a couple of, the one the hospital owns is probably one of the last potential larger commercial, and it has the Eversource going through it, so it has its own constraints. Obviously, depending on what happens with Crescenti property, that's a variable. But on the whole, the commercial lots that have potential are fragmented to be pretty small, that they may not be able to achieve that density on a single level development pattern anyways. So it may constrain them more than being able to go up in a multifamily structure. Obviously, they can use each square footage of ground more intensely than cottages where they're spread out. But
That makes sense. I just want to ask the question because we may be facing that discussion.
okay. So I think we've gone through the other things. So we're down to building height, which I know Peter had some thoughts on this and had run some calculations, and maybe it makes sense now, Peter, to just have that conversation because I think it is one that we should think about.
Yeah, again, I was thinking about if I were going to develop one of these, the height that we're talking about here is a height limit of 20 feet. And we are allowing a two-story cottage building. And if you considered, when I did residential development, I would never build something that had an interior ceiling height less than 8.5 feet. 8 feet starts to get a little bit tight, a little uncomfortable for some people. 8.5 is a good marketable standard. So if you say 8.5 feet plus some depth for the joists of the floor above, we're getting closer to about 10 feet. And then we add another floor on top of that, so we're at 20 feet. And then we want to encourage a gable roof, since the definition of height in New London includes the pitch of the roof to the top of the pitched roof. So, and we want to encourage pitched roofs because that seems to be a comfortable New England style. So we're already over 20 feet. So I don't know what the magic number is, but 27. I did the calculation on a small cottage, and it seems to me it would be 25 to 27 feet, but it all depends on the width of the building because that and the pitch of the roof. So.
But the square footage means that you're going to have the small square footage means you're going to have a higher pitch.
That's right.
Which is aesthetically better, right? I mean, also better for shedding snow and all that sort of stuff. So.
Yep, yeah.
It does, we have limited it to 1.5 stories, so it wouldn't be the 9 plus 9 plus roof above that. The second story and roof would be one figure, right? So like these, where we've got so if you have I don't know, what's a typical foundation stand above a foot for the foundation, plus the 9 feet of the first floor, so we're at 10 feet to get here. And then right now we're allowing for an additional 10 feet to get to the gable. I think the question is, do you want more than that?
Well, it also limits the number of units in the cottage court that are allowed to have a full-story second floor. So it's not as if you're going to have, a wall of that height. So I think I'm okay with what we've got.
I think the constraining factor here will be the scale of each individual unit. I actually think to me, the height isn't the issue, because if you've got a small enough base, then you're going to have these kind of cute looking things that might be a little bit taller, but I think I don't know. I think height is sometimes like a proxy for massing and how big something is. And if these are smaller, I don't think the height's going to be such a problem.
I agree.
And
Especially if we limit the number of units. 30%, only 30% of them would have a full second story.
And so, Peter, do you think that the 20 feet applies for the units that are 1.5 stories? And then should we really have a separate height in that number 2 for the ones that, the 30% who could go up to a full second story, go to 25 feet, say, to sort of tier it?
Well, it does say, I'm struggling with how to do it. We do have something, it's the average height of the structure. Perhaps that would also relate to the average height of the roofs. So if the second floor of a building that we want to encourage is set back, as you showed in the picture, then the lower roof reduces the average height of the roof. So I'm trying to keep this simple so it doesn't, developers need clarity and simplicity. We always want to strive for that. So,
and maybe this is where obviously this is the number that the consultants and the way that the consultants suggested we look at it when they've had a couple of these ordinances play out in real life and been able to be designed in a manner that conforms. So, in some ways it might be putting our faith in their expertise, but if changing that to 22 feet provides a little bit more flexibility, I don't think that 2 feet materially changes the feel of it, but if in practical terms it makes it a little bit easier and just more approachable, that might be something to think about, that just change the flat 20 to 22.
Yeah, and the
Simplest,
second
or-
floor is set back, so it gives you the average height.
Right.
I'm
Again,
fine with that.
I think the massing here is really what's going to be, it's going to drive the aesthetic appeal versus the height. I think height, like I said, is often a proxy for, we don't want this giant thing that seems out of character with the town. But these are small individual buildings, and so I think, frankly, I can think of homes even like that I know of in Hanover and other places that are small massing, small footprint, that are pretty tall, that have pretty pitched roofs, and they're beautiful. So I think that's, the height is itself may be less an issue than we think in some ways. But if we go to 22, keep it simple, and that's, no one's going to notice the difference in 2 feet, I think we're all after the same thing here.
Where are we adding the 2 feet, to the 20 or to the second floor, full second floors?
I think Adam was suggesting just the 22, making it 22 to keep it
22
simple.
across the board.
Yep.
Because again, Marianne, it's an average of the roof height. So since we're requiring the second floor be set back over the first floor, the average height of the roof will be, we'll bring that down a little bit.
Well,
Right, so we don't go too tall in 22 so that we don't get a super tall, I mean, again, which would defeat the purpose. It would be, a builder wouldn't do that because it's expensive and it's a
so-
waste, but,
the measuring points for average would be from the ground in the front, from the ground up to the single level roof, and then from the ground to the double level roof.
right.
So that would be essentially be so you've got 0.5, 0.51, and 3, so you'd have 3 divided by 4, right? So you've got a full 50%, 50% added to 1 on the front is one measure. And then the back, the third and the fourth measure would take you up to a total of 3, 2-level measures. So if you've got 3 2-level measures divided by 4, what does that give you? 0.66?
If anyone followed that.
I'm
Who's
okay
on
with
first? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I'm okay with 20. But I'll give on 22. But it just suggests to me that the back half on the second floor is going to be higher.
And that's what we're saying, it's average, so it will be, potentially. But again, there's also a limit to the floors, and there's no, I mean, developer doesn't want to spend money that they don't need to on materials that they, for extra height that aren't going to, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Right, and these are truss roofs anyway.
What's
Right.
that? What did you say, Peter?
They're trussed roofs
These
anyway.
these are truss
okay.
roofs. Yeah,
All right.
they lower them in.
Right.
So quick show of hands. 20
22. I'm
I'm
good
okay.
with 22.
and then 22.
So, do we have a sense? Okay. Can we do that again? I'm sorry. Who wants to keep it at 20? It sounds like people are good with 22.
22. Okay.
Is that, please, I know, Marianne, I understand you are good with 20, but anyone else?
Steve's raising his hand.
Oh, sorry, Steve, I missed that. Please, come on up.
One is, I'm confused, you're talking about average height, but what I see on paper here talks about maximum height. Building height, and so where's this average height of all buildings concept? I'm not seeing it. Or maybe I misunderstand it.
So it's that next sentence, Steve, for cottage court developments, building height shall be calculated by measuring the average height of the structure from 4 sides from the adjoining ground to the roof ridge.
Oh, okay.
A1.
I knew I was missing it.
So maybe, do we eliminate the word maximum and say the building height permitted, and then we're saying how that's, okay.
Yeah. It's still a little ambiguous, but as long as it's understood
And that,
by the
and
board.
that is consistent with how our height regulation everywhere else in town for other developments is looked at, so I think it at least has a general understanding there.
Okay, good. The second question, though, is you talked about the net developable area and have mentioned steep slopes many times. I don't see it here, and I don't see it, it's not defined elsewhere in this ordinance that I saw. So is steep slopes missing from the bottom of page 1?
Part of the definition.
Let me just,
Yeah, it should have steep slopes in there as well.
So, oh, interesting though, the net tract area.
Yeah, I just did a word search in the zoning ordinance and it didn't pop up, but
I think the consultants may have, they wrote both of these, the workforce and this one, and said that they're the same. So the word used in the existing ordinance or phrase used is net tract area, the remaining area of a property after subtracting all wetlands, floodplains, areas with steep slopes greater than 25% within the steep slopes overlay, blah, blah, blah. So I think it may be, we need to change developable to net tract so that we're consistent between the two regulations, and then that's already baked into the definition in the zoning ordinance.
okay, and it has steep slopes in it. Cool.
Yep.
Good
Thank you
catch.
for catching that.
Thanks, Steve.
Good catch.
Yeah, good catch. All right, we should wrap up, right?
And to that point, Adam, maybe we shouldn't add this definition in the rest of that paragraph because it's already been defined elsewhere. See, the next sentence says, it starts to talk about net developable area to help define it and describe it. If we have it elsewhere, I don't like to see regulations that define things in two different places.
Frankly, I think if we're using a capitalized phrase in the zoning ordinance, it doesn't need the definition here. The point of that is to guide people there, so perhaps we just eliminate that section in this. Okay.
This is going to be, when you do the calculations, it's kind of tricky. This
Can you use your microphone? Sorry.
Is it okay if I go back to the 22 feet? I'll talk later about it. We can run the numbers, but what happens is you get an average of 16 feet, but that means that the average of 16 really can be 22, and therefore what happens is the back height of the second level is much higher than 22. I'll deal with it, I mean, I can. I'll
Yeah,
crunch the
I
numbers
think we know that.
later.
I think what we're saying is that.
What's that?
I think we get that it will be higher.
Yeah, and let me just,
I don't think it's going to be wildly higher, but I think
well,
that's
let
the
me
intent. Yep.
figure out the number.
And I'm sorry to go back to the net developable area versus net tract area, but there is a difference between what they, besides just the steep slopes, where they have excluded public and private rights of way for streets and utilities.
So it would be 29 feet, would be.
Okay. And so if we default to net tract area versus the net developable area, we're allowing for the area for streets and utilities to be part of the equation. So do we simply add a separate provision that doesn't build it into the phrase? We just say public, private rights of way, streets, and utilities are not part of the.
I think it makes sense to carve that out.
Okay.
And then just do the net tract area. I don't know what other folks think.
Landscaping would definitely be part of the.
That's different from the definition we have in the regs?
Correct. So where the consultants this time proposed net developable area, which didn't include steep slopes, but then included the exclusion of right-of-ways, if we drop back to using the consistent definition of net tract area so that we encompass all of those environmental portions, not counting towards the density, we're then eliminating the exclusion for.
And if you're going to do that, net developable area should be net tract area plus or minus. I lost track of what you're.
We're saying that we're going to go to net tract area, but then Adam is suggesting that we could then put an additional provision about.
So we can either have an additional provision that says public and private rights of way also do not go into your density, or we can amend the actual net tract area definition to include public and private rights of way and utilities, understanding that does not just impact the density of the cottage court proposal, but it impacts the density of the workforce housing.
Could I make a suggestion? That you use net developable area and define it as net tract area, plus or minus these adjustments you want to make to it, so that we don't change net tract area. Unless, I mean, I think we really got to look at that.
Yeah, I don't think
where else it's
anybody,
used.
I don't think we wanted to change net tract area at all. I think.
Right, but I would use both of them so that,
Okay, so I'll wordsmith this so that we get all of the constraints of net tract area plus public and private, put something together to propose to you.
I think that's what we're after.
Okay.
I think I'm thinking the same thing Paul is, that we have two different definitions. One definition is for net tract area, and one definition is for net developable area. And again, I'm thinking about clarification to the people that need to understand this in March.
Fair point.
Yeah, I think probably the simplest way is to just use net tract area and then a separate provision saying rights of way also do not count. And just-
What we're trying to get
and-
across. is
Right,
that
and
we're-
don't tie that to a phrase of any kind, just, okay.
All right, we need to wrap up. We're over time. I apologize for that, but I appreciate everyone's time and discussion. So we have the 5th, right?
We do, yep.
Feel like we'll maybe need that?
Yeah, I think we probably need the 5th to finish getting through cottage cluster. We can keep it at 7:30, make sure we have 90 minutes, or if you are confident enough that an hour is enough, we could do 8 to 9.
I'd prefer to keep it at 7:30. I know that's
That
early asking a lot of
works for me.
folks, and
Yep.
you're okay with that? I just want to
Yeah.
make sure we have a buffer because we're getting,
Yep.
just because these things can take more time than you would think they would. So, as we may all be witness to.
So then, next meeting would be the 5th at 7:30 a.m., and then with a target of the planning board, the regular planning board meeting on the 9th will be when the members actually take a vote to move them forward to public hearing in January. All right?
So just wanted, yeah, that sounds great. So please put the 5th on your calendar at 7:30. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Steve, for coming and sharing your thoughts. Appreciate it. Thanks to the Housing Commission for all your work on this. It's incredible. And to the Planning Board as well for continuing to work on this. And I hope everybody has a happy and safe Thanksgiving.
And if anybody, Paul, I know you can't be here on the 5th. If there were things that we didn't get through today in the cottage, if you guys could just email them to Tim and I, if you're not going to be able to be here on the 5th, we can try to approach those for you.
Yeah, great point, Adam. We just need a motion to adjourn.
What's the date
The 5th, December 5th.
of December?
Yep. Friday, same time. Thank you, Charlene. Can we get a second? Somebody? Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Aye.